Psych with Mike and Brett is now a book. Psych with Mike and Brett, A User's Guide to Being Human, is our new book that's available at Kendall Hunt, Barnes & Noble, and on Amazon. Pick up a copy today and leave a review. Also, find us on YouTube and subscribe to the podcast. That really helps us out. Now, it's time for Psych with Mike and Brett. Welcome into the Psych with Mike and Brett Library. This is Dr. Michael Mahan.
And I'm Brett Newcomb.
And sometimes we do therapy with people who experience trauma.
I think more often than not, we do therapy with people that have experienced trauma. But one of the things that you do with a new client is you say, with a brand new client walking in, do you have a sexual trauma history? Mm-hmm. Do you have a trauma history? And many, many times people will initially deny it. No, I don't have that at all. Mm-hmm. When they know that's not an honest reflection, but sometimes they don't know.
Right.
And it doesn't uncover itself. And what I tell people all the time as we discuss the whole false memory syndrome and are we creating iatrogenic issues, which are therapist-caused issues. Mm-hmm. I ask these questions and lead you down this path, and you become convinced that happened to you.
Right.
That's an iatrogenic production. But a lot of times people start to remember things, or they'll have flashbacks, or they'll have pictures in their mind that are anxiety attacks, and they don't know why, or they don't know where it came from, or they don't remember anything ever happening. And what I always tell them is you won't be able to remember until you are strong enough to afford to remember.
Right.
And then things will uncover. Mm-hmm. And if they uncover, we can talk about them, and we can process them, and that's beneficial for you because that suppression has an energy cost and a response cost that breaks out in random times. You don't know where that came from.
Right.
And people are like, why are you behaving like that? What's going on? Where'd that come from? You're like, I don't know. And you don't know. But when you can, I have a client that just recently experienced a significant trauma. And I was able to visit with them within a month of the experience. They couldn't remember any of it.
Right.
At all.
Right.
People told them this happened and you were there. And they're like, I don't know that. I don't remember that. But in the subsequent 2 months that I've been talking to them, they've remembered more and more. And what I tell them is, you may not ever remember it. You may not ever remember all of it. You may remember glimpses and pieces of it. But whatever you remember, you will be able to afford to handle and process. And my recommendation is, I try to tell them that experience comes in waves. And so you'll be busy doing something, fixing dinner, and all of a sudden you're on your knees crying, or you're frozen with horror or whatever. I said, don't stuff it. Don't shut it off. Don't hold your breath and squeeze yourself tight and force it to go away. Let it process. If you need to cry, cry. I said, you can be on your knees crying your eyes out, sobbing, and suddenly you're like, I need some M&Ms. And you get up and go open the fridge and see if there's M&Ms in the fridge. It just comes and it goes if you let it go through you. And then when you work on those issues as a therapist, you try to teach them, feel it, know what you're feeling. I'm feeling this right now. Label it. What is it? I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling lonely. Whatever I'm feeling. And externalize it. Say it out loud. Even to the universe. If nobody's around, just say, I'm so friggin' lonely. I'm so damn sad. Why is this what I'm experiencing? But if you can feel it, label it, and externalize it, you can process it, and it will dissipate, and you will be lighter. And over time, you chip away all that oppressive suppression that protected you from the trauma. So I'm sorry, I went off on a long tangent, far from where you were going to go.
No. But you were trained in the 1980s. The peak of your career was the 1990s when you were a professor.
When I was young,
and I was being trained in the 1990s. And so both of us were trained and started working at a time before the newer forms of imaging came out, and so we knew less about trauma. So you're talking about this is a perspective that we've had about trauma since the beginning of time. I mean, so this would go even all the way back to Sigmund Freud, who called it neuroses, but would really be what we would now today consider trauma. So we've known that trauma was a thing. Now today, there is a branch of psychology that's all about trauma-informed psychology. And the truth is that most of the reason why we probably find ourselves to be emotionally untethered is because of things that have happened in our lives that we would consider trauma that have actually changed our brains at a very real biological level. So we now know that trauma changes the very biology, the makeup, the electrochemical balances in our brains. And that can happen both when you have small traumas over a long period of time called chronic trauma, or acute trauma, which is a lot of trauma all at one time, which is what we would naturally associate with people's experiences during war.
And the more recent research is beginning to show a significant differential in the way men and women experience and survive trauma. And that women are labeled more frequently with PTSD than men. The data that I have seen says that women's trauma is most often driven by inappropriate sexual encounters at inappropriate times, as children, as young women, even as adult women, and that society downplays and denies that that exists, that it doesn't happen, or it only happens in certain families or certain communities or certain religious groups or economic groups. It happens universally at all levels of society, and there's lots of research to support that. But what the research is now saying is that for women who have PTSD issues, trauma issues that interrupt their lives and destroy their relationships, it more often than not goes back to some kind of inappropriate sexual trauma. And sexual trauma, especially in childhood, can be overt or covert. So overt sexual trauma, somebody touches you that's not supposed to touch you in ways they're not supposed to touch you, or they force you to do sexual things as a child that, you don't know anything about, but this is what they teach you to do, or this is how they teach you to survive. If you don't want to be punished in some other way, if you don't want some other significant consequence, do these things and then you'll be safe. And so they learn to do that. And then they are taught that's a secret. They're taught, you made this happen. I'm not a bad person. You're a seductive evil witch at 9 years old. You made me do this to you. You had control over me. You're a bad person. You'll always be a bad person. People will always know this about you. And if you let this out, you'll be destroyed. And if you let this out, I'll kill your dog, or I'll kill your parents, or I'll kill your baby brother. And you have to keep this secret. Stuff it inside. Don't remember it. It didn't happen. And then they deny it. It didn't happen. So that happens to women regularly, to females regularly in their childhood and in their young adulthood and older. For men, trauma most recently is being understood, and I think because of 20 years of nonstop war, it's being defined as war-related or accident-related. Have a car wreck, get into injury on the football field, fall down a flight of steps, something like that becomes traumatic for you. And not as often become known as PTSD. Partly because coping strategies that men use. It becomes known as alcoholism or drug addiction or a violent personality because you have these outbreaks of things that get you arrested or what have you. And so if the therapist knows this, when the client comes in and it becomes uncovered that seems to be what they're dealing with, then it gives them information about how to lead the discussion for the discovery process and the recovery process.
And, a lot of trauma that we now accept as trauma has evolved over time and has come out of that military kind of mindset. If you see your buddy blown up by an IED in Iraq, then we can say, okay, yeah, that seems like that was traumatic. But you're going to war. You don't want to have to deal with that, number one, and you don't want to be seen as the guy who's too weak to be able to go out and fight. And so they've always come back from that more quickly than probably they should have. I don't think there's ever been really any significant kind of treatment for that. but it goes all the way back to World War II, right? So we used to call it shell shock in the First World War. Then in World War II, it was called battle fatigue. In Vietnam was the first time that we really started to acknowledge it as trauma, and that's when PTSD became a diagnosis. And as that happened, as we started to acknowledge that trauma happened in war, we started to apply it to different things. So now PTSD applies to all manner of different kinds of trauma, as it should have always, but it's been an evolving kind of perspective that we've had, most closely associated with those men, but now we recognize how much trauma that women have been experiencing that we just never acknowledged.
Well, and society culturally understands, interprets, trains around the issue of trauma differently for men and women.
Sure.
Men who go off to war, especially those who go into special forces and do more dangerous, harder things as an everyday approach to life, very frequently have already experienced traumatic training and mind setting because of childhoods that they lived.
Exactly, yeah.
But that experience has been suppressed. Men are taught not to cry. They're taught to be tough. They're not to be a weakling. They're bullied if they display any weakness at all by their peers and by their parents and by their authority figures, school teachers. And I used to, when I was teaching high school, talk to girls. Always talk about, I want a sensitive man. I want a man that understands. I want a man that can cry. Well, they do
until
if they
get
cry
one.
in gentlemanly John Wayne kind of ways.
Right.
If it's kind of like my lip quivers and maybe a tear rolls down my cheek, but I'm not sobbing and boo-hooing. If they get a man that's sobbing and boo-hooing, they step back and go, oh, that's not for me. I can't handle that. There's something wrong with him. So men are taught not to do that. Women are expected to do that.
Right.
As a way to say, I'm in trouble here. And then they're usually, it's diminished. It's like, oh, you're overreacting. You're just too volatile. It wasn't really what you thought it was, but you come here and let me give you a hug. But boys are told, suck it up.
Right.
You need something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about.
And
so our culture today still says differently to men and women.
Exactly.
How to express emotions.
Big boys don't.
Don't cry. Yeah, absolutely.
Fear is a sign of.
And if they do, I'm going to hurt you.
Fear is a sign of.
Don't do that to
weakness.
me. I hate that. You say whatever you want to say.
But the point being that we are acculturated to eliminate 50% of the human emotional spectrum. And as I've said in the book, and by the way, we have a book out. People should buy our book because it's a great book. Maybe the best psychology book of 2025. But I believe...
Well, certainly it's the best one that we've written.
It's the best one we've written in 2025. And I believe and make a case for the idea that in reality, tears, sadness should be the default human emotion. And there's a reason for that. We're going to talk specifically about that in other podcasts. And it is something that we talk about in the book. But what amazed me about this article that you sent, which talked about the HPA axis, so the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, which I talk a lot about in the book, and that trauma response, which is understood very, very well, the difference, the biological difference for women as opposed to men. So both of us activate the fight or flight response, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis.
And men fight and women fly?
Well, yes, partially. Yeah. But in addition, women's brains release oxytocin, which is a very, very powerful pro-social hormone, which engages them in wanting to have a tend and befriend kind of reaction to the trauma. So this explains why individuals who were traumatized by Harvey Weinstein continue to remain in proximity to him and even in relationships with him, because the experience, the biological experience of trauma for women is chemically different than the biological experience for men. That's fascinating to me.
Chemically how? Because of the oxytocin?
Because the oxytocin, right, comes into their brains, which is a pro-social hormone, which makes people...
So men don't experience an oxytocin increase when they
have trauma. That's right.
They just shut down.
They just shut down. They have the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis activation causes cortisol and adrenaline to be pumped into the system. So they get super hyped up. That's why they have those anger reactions and tend to medicate that with substance abuse.
So the anger reaction is sort of a safety valve or a cutout valve that releases some of that stuff?
It releases the energy,
Yeah.
yes, that gets trapped up, yes, because of the trauma reaction. And for women, the way that they cope with that when the oxytocin gets delivered, they still have the activation of the fight or flight response, but they also have this additional activation.
So as a man, if I get triggered at home by something that makes me angry, and I have a trauma history in my past, I'm more likely to then want to punch a hole in the wall,
Exactly.
or go out and get drunk, or go beat somebody up, or drive with road rage from maybe because my wife disrespected me and talked to me foolishly, but really from when I was a child, my grandfather beat me or something,
That's exactly right.
which I can't track. But what I can do is feel so full of an explosive energy need that I then find an outlet for it, and that reduces the pent-up distress.
Right.
But it never addresses the underlying issues, and so I just have repetitive cycles of explosive intermittent disorder.
That's exactly right.
and get myself in trouble with the law, get mouthy or uppity to somebody, get in a fist fight with somebody. Whereas women can cry, go to their social network and get support as the person who's experiencing all of that pain, or the person who's in the environment around a person who's experiencing all that pain and feeling the surge of nurturing energy
Right.
that comes forward to say, let's be supportive of you.
Right. And I think that what is even more insipid about that is that because of that oxytocin reaction, women may be more likely to befriend the abuser, keeping them in the abusive cycle much longer than maybe a man would.
So as I think about that, I remember that we talk about a lot about a chapter in a book that I used to use all the time to try to teach this concept about the drama triangle. The book was called Stepping Out of Chaos.
Yeah. Kaufman was the guy.
Marcia
who
Utane, I think.
Well, yeah, but the drama triangle is
Yeah, is Kaufman.
Kaufman.
And so then
Cartman. Cartman. Kaupman, isn't it? Cartman. Anyway, yeah. I'll
you
put the
distract
link.
me with that.
I'm
stuff.
sorry.
You'll have to look it up and write it in the notes. But anyway, you go through the three positions of the drama train. That's what they are trained to do. So then you get in all these different overlaps. It's real easy, especially in our culture today, to just get in a channel and stay there.
Yeah.
Whether it's a social grouping, a social identity, repetitive behavior process or emotional experience, relationships. I mean, the woman that divorces an alcoholic just because he's an alcoholic, 9 times out of 10 she'll marry another alcoholic. You know why? And I didn't see this coming. I didn't know. I checked because I knew that
Right.
was an issue, and he wasn't an alcoholic. Well, he was.
He was. Right.
And now you know that he was because you found another one.
Right.
And if you lose this one and you don't deal with whatever you need to deal with, you're going to go find another one.
That's right.
And you're going to have like a string of them, and everybody's going to tell you, well, it's you. And you're going to say, but it's not me. Well, it is you.
It is you, and,
Yeah.
and it's the power of nonverbal communication. So
And
that
your
guy was
conditioning.
sending was sending out those messages that said I'm an alcoholic. He was doing it nonverbally,
Yeah.
but you are designed to be attracted to that because of your history, and so you find that individual over and over again, even though the signs may not have been overtly
Different
there.
body, different names, same crap.
Exactly.
So the gist of this conversation, though, is to make clients and therapists both aware that there are now known to be differential understandings for the way men experience trauma and women experience trauma and the way they process and try to resolve it that leads them down the path of repetitive destructive cycles.
Right.
And as a therapist, if you know that, you can short circuit some of the process and save some time and money for the client and some pain if you focus in the right direction soon enough.
So you have to then be alert enough to be able to identify when these patterns may be playing out.
Yeah.
Right.
What the signifiers are.
So for a guy, just like you said, that guy is going to engage in what appears to be very self-destructive behavior. He's going to get in trouble with the police. He's going to be angry. He might get himself fired from a job. Maybe he gets divorced because his wife can't tolerate his outbursts. And that's all going to be in service to his need to try and cope with, and if he's a substance abuser, medicate that traumatic experience. Women may tend to be more nurturing. They may even engage in behaviors that are tending to and befriending the very person who is the abuser in the first place.
Or someone like.
Or someone like, yes.
So, if it was your father, then you have a father figure issue, and you go try to find a man that represents that to you, and then they repeat the abuse cycle. So, I mean, it's easy to say this and sound sexist and be dismissed for being sexist because you make global assumptions about men or women. We're just trying to say there is data,
right,
and the therapist should be aware of the data, and then at least investigate whether it's valid or not in this particular case, because all clients are different, even though we fall into
right,
pattern groups.
Right. And you're making a good point that we're painting with a broad brush here.
Yes.
Because we are presenting information for
From a
people
broad perspective.
to, yeah.
It's your job as a therapist to find out,
right,
does that apply in this
right,
case to this person?
Because
and to listen carefully.
There could be any single individual,
Yeah,
any male who tends to have more of a, what we would consider a female reaction.
An androgynous male.
Yes.
Yeah.
And vice versa, a female who has an anger reaction.
Right.
So we're not saying that is universal, but it is incredibly interesting to me, and especially because I know so much about the HPA axis response, the idea of that oxytocin being invested or involved in the reaction for females typically is something that now really helps me to be able to put into context some of the behavior that I've seen, some of the behavior that I've read about, some of the behavior that we've heard about in the news. And the reason why I think that that's important is because it helps us understand the reactions of those individuals and helps us to see them more clearly. So, because one of the things that happened in the Harvey Weinstein case was that those victims who remained in communion with him, in relationship with him, people used that as an example of, well, see, that he didn't really abuse them. And that's exactly the opposite. He did abuse them, and their reactions were consistent with that kind of abuse reaction.
But mainly my concern at this point is to say to therapists, you do not speak ex cathedra. You don't speak from the bishop's chair with knowledge and certainty. You have information that guides your exploration of the client's reality, but you have to listen to the client. You can't say, oh, you're in denial. That's a classic trait of X, Y, and Z, and so this is what's really going on. Let's move the conversation where I want it to go. You have to listen, and the discovery and uncovering comes in layers from the client, as the client can afford to see. But you've got to be careful about the iatrogenic process.
Yeah.
You don't create that reality for the client so that they learn that's what they need to give you so you'll love them.
Right.
They learn it's okay to look inside and see what's there and share it with you.
Yes.
Because you'll hear it safely.
And actually that is a fantastic point, because both of us know a guy in St. Louis that got in trouble for that.
Yeah.
And
we know a lot of guys that have done that.
That is
guys and gals. I mean, therapists have done that forever.
Yes.
It's a classic training concern.
So if you have questions about trauma or you have concerns about your relationship, we've always said that Psych with Mike and Brett is not a substitute for therapy, but we certainly would be willing to give you our feedback about those things and even get you in contact with a therapist if that is something that you need from us. We hope that you enjoyed this presentation of Psych with Mike. We want you to encourage you to buy the book. You can get it at Barnes & Noble, at Kendall Hunt, or on Amazon. The links for that will be in the show notes below. The music that appears in Psych with Mike.
Or you can go on the Barnes & Noble and Amazon website, just type our name in the search bar.
Yeah.
It'll come up.
It'll come up. So, absolutely.
And then from there you can order it if you're interested.
If you are interested.
And we hope you are.
And we hope you will read it and leave us a review. That would be fantastic. Subscribe to the show on the interwebs, on both YouTube and on our Psych with Mike psychwithmike.com site. The music that appears in Psych with Mike is written and performed by Mr. Benjamin DeClue, and as always, if it's Friday, it's Psych with Mike and Brett.